And so slowly I began to find the practices that worked for me, and that what I was taught, or what I had told myself about what meditation is and what it means and how it ought to be done, was not that absolute, was not that definite. And I slowly began to find different ways of going into a meditative practice that involved a whole lot of embracing. Embracing, 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 embracing. I got to know my inner child during therapy. And my inner child very much wanted to tell stories, which is something that I did as a little girl. I told stories, I wrote stories, I was very full of fantasy. And so my inner child told my older self that it wanted to tell stories, it wanted to be playful. And at the same week that my inner child said that, a leaflet came into the mail with my name and address on it from an organization I'd never heard from that offered theater sports courses. So that was an improvisation technique for theater. Telling stories, being playful. And through that teacher, I was introduced to another teacher who also taught an improv technique that involved voice dialogue. So I could bring my inner child out on stage and play with it. I could bring my critic out on stage and play with it. I could bring my the dictator out on stage and play with it and be it. And so I went through courses where I explored those voices, and we looked for the zeros in between. So when you allow a voice to be there and play with it and be it, then you'll find that there is a wave. So you're in the voice, you're acting it out, and then you go to a summit, and then it goes down to a zero. So the energy, you play the energy out, the energy is out, it goes back to a zero. And in between these voices, there is this moment of a zero, of nothingness. And from that nothingness, a new voice emerges. And you play it again and you look for the zeros in between, which brings an enormous amount of peace and quiet and structure into the play. Because sometimes all these voices, especially when they are allowed to come out, they all want to come out and play, because they never get a chance to come out and play. And so they tumble over one another before you know it. And it's very important to have those moments of zero in between. And doing that practice really helped me during day-to-day life to find the moments of zero in between the voices. And somehow being on stage, performing, is very much like day-to-day life. Because day-to-day life wants you to perform, to be interesting, to be impressive, to be whatever it is that people feel that you need to be. And that's also on stage. You have a feeling that an audience wants something from you. You want something. All these voices want something. And going back to the zeros in between is very important to relax into it. And because I notice it now, even when I talk about it, I notice that I'm sinking into the chair and then, okay, it's the zero. It's okay to be in a zero. And then from that zero, have the next voice appear and be or tell the story or whatever.
What's in that zero?
Nothing. And it's very interesting to explore that zero and see how difficult it is to get into it, how long you can maintain it, that it's almost destroyed with every breath that you take. Like sometimes it feels like a zero is never any longer than just one breath, or sometimes it's not, but it just takes a bit longer, but it's only as long as the next voice comes up, or how comfortable I am to be in a zero. It's taken me, I think, about 6 or 7 years of attending several 5-day-longs or 10-day-longs, exploring it before I was really comfortable to be in a zero in front of an audience. And just sit there and have no idea, have no story, have nothing to say, have nothing to do. The first thing I thought about was like, I wish I could do tricks like juggle, or so I could just stand on a stage and then juggle. So I'd be interesting to look at for an audience, and not being interesting for an audience, just be. And it's amazing the amount of tension that can bring about between me and an audience, that they're looking at you, and how much stories they project on somebody who sits there with nothing, that it's almost, it's every breath already brings about a new story. Or when I sit and you look at a stage and somebody comes on the stage, how many stories fly away, because it's not their story that's going to be told, and how many other stories come up, like tell me, play me. So that was a very interesting time, and it was a time about embracing each and every voice that comes up, and the voices that you don't want to be. They call them masks, actually. I'm talking about voices now because I'm influenced by Genpo Roshi, but then we call them masks, like in Commedia dell'arte, where you have masked, and the mask is played or fleshed out by an actor this time or a different actor the other time, but everybody wearing the mask, that is the part that you play. And it's interesting that when people put on a mask, they almost automatically become that character. And what we talked about a lot then and practiced with a lot is that sometimes a mask that I put on to play, like the critic or any other mask, sometimes it acts like an African mask. And when an African mask that's used in ceremonies and in rituals takes possession of the person, so the mask plays the person instead of the person playing the mask. And so it's a lot of, if a mask is playing me, then I'm, as an actor or an improv player, I'm no longer available for other masks to be played, and I cannot stay in that flow of going down into a zero and finding a new mask to play. Although this practice was about theater, it was about being playful, it also had a deep spiritual meaning for me, especially finding the zeros and taking it into day-to-day life, and not being attached to any of these masks, to any of these voices that wanted to be played. And one of my most impressive experiences then was that I went to Assisi in Italy, where we had a 10-day long session doing this at a Sufi center. And that Sufi center had a atmosphere that was very, very similar to the community I had with my first teacher. It was very disciplined, it was very letting go of things, and so it had this atmosphere around it. Although we did not participate in any of their activities, but it had this feeling. And I got into a flow during those 10 days where I felt like I could be in the being space playing with masks, or I could be in the audience, or I could be on the commentation line where I comment on the being that's been going on stage. It doesn't really matter. It's all part of one big flow where voices express themselves. Even if I'm in the audience, I'm a mask that plays being audience and watching. And when we're not in a session and we're having lunch, it's the same thing. I'm continuously in this flow of a voice coming up, or a voice or a mask coming up that wants to be played, and then there's a moment of zero, and then the next thing comes along. And I had a massive hay fever attack during that 10 days. And hay fever is a very, very strong energy of irritation. So I played it out as a mask, the mask of irritation. I had a very strong mask, which I couldn't, of a tearful mask that was very much present, but I couldn't attach the tearful mask to any personal drama that was going on, because it just wasn't there. But it was a very easy mask to step into and walk out away from.